And I think we're going to go ahead and get started today. So I want to start by welcoming everyone and just thanking you all for taking the time out of what must be very busy days to dive into what I hope will be a really meaningful program today. And so for anyone that I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Netta Meltzer, and I serve as the National Vice President of Community Engagement with Zioness Movement. And I'm so excited to welcome you to this program today. We all know that abortion access is a Jewish value, and every year the National Council of Jewish Women's Repro Shabbat initiative gives us the chance to gather together in support of reproductive rights and freedom. And so today, we're delighted that Christian F. Nunes, president of the National Organization for Women, is joining us in conversation. The National Organization for Women, or otherwise known as NOW, is the largest organization of feminist grassroots activists in the United States, hundreds of chapters and hundreds of thousands of members across all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Since their founding in 1966, NOW's purpose has been to take action through intersectional grassroots activism to promote feminist ideals, lead societal change, eliminate discrimination, and achieve and protect the equal rights of all women and girls in all aspects of social, political, and economic life. NOW is an intersectional, multi-issue, multi-strategy organization that takes a holistic approach to women's rights. Their official priorities are winning economic equality, securing it with an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that will guarantee equal rights for women, championing abortion rights, reproductive justice, along with other women's health issues, opposing racism, fighting discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity in all areas, including employment, housing, health services, and child custody, and ending violence against all women, no matter race, age, or socioeconomic class. Christian F. Nunes became NOW president back in August of 2020. As the second African-American president in the organization's history, the youngest person of color, and the youngest president in more than 40 years, she is leading the organization through an intersectional lens, bringing a diverse coalition of grassroots activists to work against structural sexism and racism. She's a former NOW board member and committee chair, as well as a licensed clinical social worker, consultant, and woman minority business owner. She's an active community organizer and public speaker, regularly featured at events that we all know so well, the March for Black Women, women's marches, rallies around the country in support of the Equal Rights Amendment and immigration rights as well. And along with her activism for mental health, Christian has more than 20 years of experience advocating for children's and women's issues. There's so much more I could say about Christian and about NOW, but let's dive in because we have a lot to discuss. For those of you listening in today, put your questions in the Q&A. We will address those later on in the program, but I'd like to go ahead and start by asking Christian a few questions. So I do want to start by talking about NOW. As I was growing up and learning about the feminist movement, NOW was such a groundbreaking project. From your perspective, what have been the most important initiatives and victories NOW has seen throughout its history?
Well, first, Netta, thank you and Zioness Movement for having me here and holding this space for us to have this conversation. I greatly appreciate it. One of the things I love about the National Organization for Women is that I really feel that it was kind of like the framework for a really intersectional women's movement. Before we even started talking about that term, or really were able to identify that term, NOW has been so instrumental in so many major movements, so many major campaigns. But one of the things I think that really resonates with me so well, and I'm so proud of, is that NOW has had a part in so many of the major civil rights victories and cases throughout its history. Going back from when we first were founded in 1966, from when we got started, it was about equal pay and pay discrimination and gender discrimination in ads, And from the very beginning, we started with public hearings for EEOC hearings about advertising guidelines and oppression commissions to end sex discrimination. Back then, filing petitions. And we started back then with the Equal Rights Amendment, from the very beginning of our organization structure. So we have always been embedded in the fight for, the guarantee that we'd have equal rights under the law, but also eliminating sex discrimination, eliminating discrimination for violence against women and sexual violence, domestic violence. And I think the other parts too is that just really a lot of times what we don't talk about now is who found it now. We think, we hear the story of Eva Friedan, and her napkin, but we did talk about Polly Murray, who she sat with, Dr. Reverend Polly Murray, who was the Black woman and also a non-conforming, gendered Black woman, Reverend, attorney who she sat with and met to actually come up with the action strategies to form now. She came to her and said, hey, let's get together. Let's figure out what we can do and what kind of organization we need to really, truly make sure that we're not only protecting, and defending, women's rights for gender, but also race. And so all the times we forget to talk about those other unsung heroes of now who are very important in the movement. Also Eileen Hernandez, who was the first Black president of NOW in 1970, who was also a co-founder. And so many other amazing co-founders that they had, with some were men, and we don't talk about that. So when I say NOW really was intersectional at the very beginning, we really were intersectional at the very beginning. And that is one of the most important things to me. And there's so many other amazing histories that we had, but we have been involved in every major civil rights movement, civil rights case, for every issue since our founding. And that's something I'm very proud of, and I'm very proud to represent an organization that does that and stands for that.
That's so wonderful to get such a deep dive into the history that we often do overlook. I'm so grateful for that. I'll pivot us now from the past into the future. We're here to honor Repro Shabbat, and we'll dig a little bit more deeply into that in just a moment. But I wonder if you could speak to some of the challenges and priorities that lie ahead as you look to the future and to your leadership of NOW in the future.
Sure. Well, I think what we all are seeing when we talk about Repro Shabbat is really the impact that the Dobbs decisions had on our reproductive rights, right? But not only just reproductive rights, I think our rights in general as women, and our right to privacy and autonomy and bodily autonomy and personal autonomy, our rights to make these decisions for our family planning, our rights to define our lives as we want. And even more so, I think that there are so many underlying things that decision opened the Pandora's box for that we are not talking about, which is also putting other groups' rights and communities' rights at risk because of that decision. So when we're talking about Repro Shabbat, I think we're also seeing the first time in a long time that this new generation has less rights than we've had in our whole entire lives, or even some of our parents had. We're going back of losing over 50 years of rights, civil rights, and when it comes to reproductive health. What I've been talking about lately is kind of changing our thought process of how we're looking at this when we're looking at this challenge, because if we only look at it as reproductive rights and not liberation, if we limit what we're really asking for. But what we're really asking for is freedom and liberation for our reproductive bodies and ourselves, because women are the only, gender that essentially has to worry about having siloed civil rights, for the reproductive, we don't have that for men, right? Truthfully, right? Women get healthcare, and it's all encompassing healthcare, holistic healthcare, which covers anything. But for women, it's separated for us. And it gives access to oppressors to continue to attack it and continue to try to take away rights, because we can be able to do this work as a woman, but when it comes to our pregnant person, but we can't do this, but we're not able to make these decisions when it comes to us, when it comes to our reproductive rights and our bodies. So I think we have to really look at that, because we don't see us having this argument about prostate, right? Support, which is reproductive. I'm just being if we really think about it, right? It's not the same right. We don't think about that, but we see that women have always been compartmentalized and never seen as whole. And the biggest challenge we're going to face right now is how do we get this world to really see women as whole, so they have an investment to do everything in their power to guarantee that we get the rights that we deserve and we should have had from the very beginning when the Constitution was drafted. And working against those who really are just trying to continue to put out disinformation and misinformation to make sure people are fearful of the family values as why they're going after repro rights. So we have to work really hard to challenge that disinformation, and we have to work very hard to educate people about what reproductive liberation looks like, and also how that impacts everybody and not just persons who are able to birth.
It makes me think of the phrase that we heard quite often after the Dobbs decision, which was Roe was always the floor. It's
Right.
not the ceiling, right? We have a lot more work to do. And that's really the truth. And it kind of brings me to a piece that you wrote in March of last year in Inside Sources, and you talked about what a post-Roe world would really look like. And, now we are obviously in that world.
Mm-hmm.
In that piece you wrote, women's lives will always be in danger in a society that feels threatened by women's power. And, I feel like what you're touching on there is really the foundation of all of these issues that women face in society. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit about that, that line that you wrote.
Sure. So I think when we really look at it, okay, and I'm going to try to be short about this because I can really go on about this topic.
I'm sure, me too.
But when we really look at it, right, I always tell people that the reason why people try to oppress others is because they know the power and the potential that they possess if they had full access and equity, right? What they possibly can do, the full potential, what they possibly can do. And I think it's interesting because when we look at women, women have been able to overcome and do so much with the little resources and the little rights that we have had. And during many things, during wars, women stepped up, when the men were away, when soldiers were away, when there were times women and people who were mothers and things had to carry work jobs and single mother, it's multiple times we see in history where women were put in positions where they had to make sacrifices, but they still rose, regardless. And that shows an exorbitant amount of power. And if a person has this power to be resilient and rise to that, imagine what they're capable of if they have full rights. And I think what we see is that there are people who are afraid of women having full rights. They're afraid of what they'll accomplish if they have full rights. They're afraid of not being needed if they have full rights. And so as long as they can keep them, just oppressed enough, searching enough, dependable enough, then it creates an opportunity for them to continue to access their power, maintain their power and control. And that's what we're seeing. And so when we say that they're afraid of this potential power, the power that women possess, because they know that if we really are fully given full equity to be able to finally reach equality, then where would their place be? I think that's where that becomes a question. And I think that's the wrong thing, the thought process, actually. I don't think that should be the thought process, but the people who are trying to oppress, I believe, are thinking that mindset of like, I won't be needed. They're thinking I versus them instead of how do we work collectively together to find the best solution for moving our country together or moving this world together. But there becomes the individualistic mind frame of like I versus them. And that is why they're afraid of the real potential power of women, because if it is I versus them, then where does that place me?
It's the view of power as like a zero sum, something that has like doesn't have infinite space for everyone.
Right.
as we all know, and we've touched on this a little bit, last month would have marked the 50th anniversary of Roe. And of course, the Dobbs decision last year was really devastating for all of us who are so passionate about reproductive rights and justice. I wonder if you could share a little bit about when that decision came down, and in the, in the subsequent months that we've had since then, how did you all react over it now? And where do you see the fight going from here? As we did say, Roe is always the floor, not the ceiling. What was the reaction, and what's next?
So I think it was something that we were prepared for it to happen, especially with the leak, a little leak draft, but it still was devastating, and that it actually took place, right? It was devastating to see that so many Supreme Court justices who made this commitment, to be fair and rule in ways that would benefit, our country, would be so biased, and so patriarchal in their viewpoints, that they would be willing to roll back rights and base it off the original Constitution, essentially, is what they did, right? Which was never really made for many of us, right? So I think that we knew it was going to possibly come, but it still was devastating to see it happen. But at the same time, when this goes back when I talk about the power of women, I think also what it did was it agitated women into action. And it let people who maybe thought before that they were in a safe place, and maybe they were disconnected from other issues like economic injustice, or racial injustice, or LGBTQIA injustices. Like maybe they felt like they were disconnected from other social justice issues. This hit home for them. And I think this provided a bridge for us to connect on in some ways, and for them to finally get up and say that I also am now affected and I need to do something. So in some ways it helped create some solidarity in our communities. And I think that what it did is reminded us that we have to continue to fight for equality and justice. We can't stop. Like there will always be someone strategizing to gain power. And so our work is making sure that we're securing a future of fairness and justice for those who definitely were never given that at the very beginning, or our country was not built for them to have that at the very beginning. So I think we've seen women just really be charged, and allies be charged, to say that we will not, like you said, Roe was the floor, so now we have to aim and ask for more. And we have to make sure we're going after it. So I've seen more charge, I've seen more supports, I've seen more people coming forth, and really putting themselves out there on the line for this, because it's concerning. It's really, we're putting our lives on for risking our lives, because our lives are at risk. And so we've seen an increase in membership, we've seen an increase in activism, and I think a lot of orgs have, and also support to make sure people who don't have the needs they have are getting those funds to get the things like abortion access, abortion care, travel, things like that. So I think it's helped in some ways bring the community together, understanding that anybody can be affected at any time, but we still have so much more to do to, end all the misinformation that's still presenting itself out there.
I love that we're risking our lives because our lives are at risk. I feel like that's such a profound and true statement for those of us who are really passionate about reproductive rights. And you've pivoted us really nicely to something else I want to talk about. You recently wrote a piece in the Buffalo News about America's relationship with the truth, and the way that fraught relationship has impacted women's rights, and this dangerous period that we're entering, in which those who actively attack the truth are lifted up and celebrated in some cases. One of the things I think we're battling at Zioness, and really as a progressive movement in general, is disinformation and misinformation. And it's a difficult uphill battle in the modern media environment that we're in. And so I wonder, from your perspective, how do we move the needle on that? How do we win the fight for truth?
Truth is an interesting thing, right? Because what's that saying? Perception is reality, right? There is a truth, though. There is a truth that exists. And what we have to remind people is your perception is not truth. And that's part of the information and education we have to do is our perception is not truth, right? And it may feel real to, I remember when I was a therapist, I used to tell my clients this all the time. It may feel very real to you. It may feel like a fact to you, but it is based off of your beliefs, what you're nurtured and come from experiences and come from other things and come from what you're taught and passed down and how you've cognitively distorted things. And so part of what we have to do is educate people to understand the difference between what the real truth is and what their perception and belief about what truth is, because what they've been taught from this disinformation. And it's a constant battle we have to do, but it's such a necessary battle. What we're seeing right now is that, opposition and those who seek violence and those who are oppressors and those who are trying to keep hate, going, are really using disinformation for it's like their go-to, and then what they do is they prey on the fear of people, and they use that as their tactic, is using fear, a fear of what will happen if this, they gain control, what will happen if they're in your neighborhood, what about your children, they utilize what they consider the most victimized or the most meek or mild to use that as a fear to get people to buy into their disinformation message. And it's not playing on truth, it's playing on emotion, it's playing on fear, it's playing on, nurtured ideologies and ways that person's been raised that are not real. And so we have to continue in our education to remind people about really what fact is. History is fact. History is fact. And history says this, right? So we have to separate this from evidence and history, which is fact, versus what your interpretation, your perception about what happened is, which is a belief. And those are two separate things. And the more I think we do that, the more helpful we'll be in our communication to people. But we have to really take our time to have those conversations and have people think about that. Like, is this your perception or is this actually history? Because history exists. You cannot change history. And what we see them trying to do is erase history. We see them trying to change history. We see them trying to, distort history. We see them trying to distort messaging to really create chaos and, divisiveness between communities, because that helps them gain more power, because it distracts the collectiveness of the other communities. So we have to push back on that. And we have to continue to push back on that. And we have to be very aware and cognizant about it at all times. And always push back to within our own communities, that is this perception or is this truth? What is the fact? What do we know for sure versus what do we feel? Because feeling is not fact. And I always tell that feeling is not fact. And there's a reason why you feel that. And it's okay to go through these different feelings, but we cannot rely on our feelings to help us shape this world. We just can't.
That's so important to remember. And I think, like I said, I feel like everyone in the progressive movement right now is struggling with this. And, the more we can work together to bring truth back to the center, to bring facts back to the center, the better we'll be in the long run. I'll shift us a little bit here now, and I'll share that one of the reasons that we here at Zioness initially got in touch was because we, of course, are paying a lot of attention to recent increasing anti-Semitism. We've seen an uptick in the last several months. Back in December, I actually wrote a blog post for the Times of Israel because I was really struck by the lack of comment from major progressive organizations, the lack of statements, the lack of social media posts, the lack of just any response to what we in the Jewish community were seeing as like a stark, alarming rise in anti-Semitism. And then it was brought to my attention that your organization adopted a resolution denouncing anti-Semitism. And it's the only organization we were aware of that took a step like this. And so that was really important for us to connect with you and partner. Tell us about the process of adopting that resolution. How did it come about, and why was that important?
So I love to share the story because, we are a membership-based grassroots organization, and this resolution actually came from our grassroots, and it started with at a Florida State conference, their annual conference, where they felt it was really important. We've been having conversations about it, and I had been having side conversations of like, what do we do? What do we do? But Florida State took upon themselves to actually adopt a resolution at their Florida State conference. And then they forwarded to us, to the national board, that they wanted to put it for us for emergency adoption. So then what we did as the board was that we reviewed it, and then we like went through it, and we made sure that it really was, we made sure it was really like inclusive, and so we did some editing, and we made sure it was inclusive, and it was really touching on everything we needed to be touched on. And then we had the board unanimously voted to approve it. So it was a great example of how our state chapters said like, hey, we want this now. We said, okay, send it to us. We looked at it. We went through, and our instructions process committee and our board went through it and made sure it was really what we felt really encompassed, like facts, and like I said, back to facts, right? And things like that, and all the details need to be included in that, and just reached out to different peers and groups, and then we passed it, and we were very happy to do so, because part of being intersectional, a grassroots organization, and being inclusive is standing up in solidarity for all groups who are experiencing injustice, right? And who are experiencing oppression or discrimination. We cannot pick sides. We cannot choose who we stand up for and who we do not. Then we're not being true. We're not being authentic allies. We are not being authentic in our work as social justice activists if we decide we're only going to be activists for some groups and not others. And so I always say, Audre Lorde's one of my favorite poets, and she has the quote everyone knows is like, I'm not free if the woman next to me, I'm paraphrasing, of course, is not free, even if her shackles are different from my own. But I always use that because I think we have to really think about that when we're doing this work. It doesn't matter if you directly are not impacted by this. If somebody else is hurting and struggling and going through something, it is our job to step up and say, how do we support them in this? And how do we do what we can to be in solidarity and show support? And that's kind of how that all happened. And that's just the first step of it. So there's other things that come in that resolution that we're planning on doing as an organization, so that we being authentic and building a relationship and not just being performative. I'm really anti-performative. so that's just
Me
the start
too.
of it. But yeah, that's how it is. So we really started with our grassroots, and it came up to the national, and then we went from there.
It's so interesting. And I think we were so struck by it because, as many of us know, in a lot of diversity initiatives, we don't really see the Jewish community being included in those considerations. So I don't know if you know the answer to this, but how do we get more organizations to do what yours did?
Well, I think part of it, Netta, sometimes I think like lack of awareness is part of what the problem is, right? And so I think it might be just like having conversations, like getting like-minded progressive groups together and talking about the importance of how do we come together and include all in these movements. And it doesn't have to just be faith-led organizations that are getting together. It doesn't have to just be Jewish-led organizations that are getting together. It has to be all of us coming together who are working toward the same common goal. And then when we come together all in that same space, and that's when we can also invite others in. And then also too, like when I know something going on, for me to also say, oh, wait, I know Netta over at Zioness, you need to call her and include her, so part of that is the other part is like, how do we build collaborative partnerships? It's like making sure that we're connecting others within our movement to others so that their word and their narratives can be uplifted. That's part of the power, and that's part of the way we do this, because I think part of it is when we don't make those connections, sometimes people just don't know, or they get stuck in their own little circles and bubbles, not even intentionally. They just go to their go-tos. So we have to make sure we break that up. You know, I'm like, wait, you're forgetting a whole bunch of people over here. Like, hey, what about them? Okay, well, I just met this great person over here who's doing this great work, and we need to bring them into the loop too to hear their perspective. And that's really where we're talking about representation matters, because we can't. We're an ally group. Now is an ally organization. We're not an expert in one thing. We are an ally. But right, intersectional is probably where we're expert in, being an intersectional feminist group. But I mean, you know, there's groups who specialize in different things. So we have to rely on those groups to lead the conversations for us on some things. We have a lot of expertise, but we still have to go to other groups. And so I think it's important for all of us when we hear things to make sure that we are bringing in others to the table, and not just keeping and staying in our circles.
I really agree with you that certainly with everything you said, but I do, you know, awareness is such an issue too. I think there's such a, and I've, you know, talked about this in the past, that like I don't think that everyone really understands what a Jewish person is, you know, what the connection to Israel is, and, you know, why we, you know, have certain stances on certain things. And so some of it is really building that awareness, and the partnerships and the collaboration is how you do that. And the humanization of knowing people and connecting people is also important too. At Zioness, you know, we know, I'll pause really quickly just to remind folks, if you have questions that you want to have addressed in the Q&A, please do pop them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will leave some time for those questions, so don't hesitate to put those in. In the meantime, at Zioness, you know, we know that anti-Semitism comes from all directions, including, unfortunately, from the progressive left, where it manifests as anti-Zionism, and is part of the reason why Zioness exists. But for us, just as abortion access is a critical component of women's liberation, Zionism is a critical component of Jewish identity and Jewish liberation. I wonder if anti-Zionism is something that you've seen in your leadership in the progressive world, and how you go about handling it when you do see it.
So honestly, I don't think many, like, this goes back to people being informed and educated. I don't think many people know the difference. And I'll be the first one to admit I had to do some research, right, to really understand more about Zionism myself, you know. And so I think that's where, you know, a lot of people, I haven't heard much about it. I haven't heard anything negative, you know, but I'm a quick person too, that people know not to come at me with anything negative about people, that's derogatory. But really truthfully, like, I haven't heard anything derogatory, but I also feel that people probably don't know what to ask, or what to say or what to think, because there's like that lack of information. And I think this is where, you know, conversations like this can be very powerful to also, like, for now to invite you to a town hall, or Zionists to a town hall, and share this information and talk about, you know, the Zionist faith and you know, the Zionist faith in the movement as well, because I think that's Zionism, because I think that's what's important for people to really understand what that liberation looks like, and why it's important, and what your viewpoints are, so people are more educated accurately and not off of disinformation. Because when you pick up you know, you Google, you're going to find a whole bunch of disinformation. If you, you know, so, and we know there's such a like anti-Semitism going on right now, it's better to get it from the accurate source than it is to just rely on social media at this point.
And we've just talked about how much of what people can absorb from the current media landscape is unreliable. I do think there's a lot to be said for awareness and education, and really like shaping that narrative through the sources that know what it is and can explain it. We've spoken about your intersectional approach that you bring to your leadership at Now a little bit, which includes speaking out against anti-Semitism. And again, for us, that's really, we were so inspired by that, because we don't see it, that many people doing that. We don't tend to see many leaders and organizations, including the Jewish community, in their vision for equity and inclusion. And so that approach inspires us and gives us hope, because we know that one of the keys to moving the progressive movement forward is to fight white supremacy. And fighting white supremacy means fighting anti-Semitism.
Absolutely.
So I wonder if you can share your vision for intersectionality and inclusion with us, and how that impacts the way that you approach now's key priorities.
I mean, that just, first, let me say, that just kind of did a light bulb in my head when you said that, because I think that's part of the messaging change maybe that needs to be challenged for organizations, and that may be something powerful that Zioness can do, right? Is to really talk about, when we're having this conversation about challenging white supremacy, that also includes this. Because sometimes we get narrow-minded when we talk about white supremacy to only talk about race, right? But we don't talk about the other forms of white supremacy that do exist. So that is a start right there, is how do we expand how we talk about white supremacy and what that includes, and how we fight it fully, and what that includes when we're fighting it completely and holistically, and I think that's a good place, right? And I think also challenging organizations to change how they're discussing and how they're messaging their fight for white supremacy, right, and racial justice. And I know we can be better at that as well as an organization. And part of our intersectionality is really just that simple. It's the fact that it's understanding that, how power and oppression shifts very differently for different people depending on the multiple identities that they have, and it could be for one person very low, but from like one woman, but for another woman with multiple different other identities that have their own layer of oppression, it can be very greater, and their experience can be much harder and more I call it traumatic, ultimately on this world, when you're dealing with lots of different traumas of oppression. So I think it's really understanding, like, when we're looking at the work we're doing, we cannot pretend that people don't have different experiences in the same groups or affinity groups or same communities, because they very well have different experiences in the same communities. It is not cookie cutter. And so we have to acknowledge that, and not acknowledge that the work we do has to be inclusive, to look at the different identities and the oppression, discrimination that's attached to those identities when we're trying to do advocacy, when we're trying to do activism, when we're trying to do legislation, when we're trying to do even resources and community service for those groups and organizing. We can't just go into community and talk about organizing and you just need to do this. Like one of the best examples I give is about voter ed and voter registration, right? And voter turnout, because we're so quick to say, we got to increase these numbers in these communities, right? and these numbers have low voter turnout, these communities, and normally they're communities of color, Black and brown communities. But we're not looking at like all the other, layers of discrimination and oppression these communities also deal with, right? And then we are saying, well, why do they have, all we have to do is give them the information. All we have to do is go register them to vote. All we have to do is this. And when we do that, we're disempowering ourselves, not the people, ourselves. Like, they know what they're dealing with, like these communities, right? But we are assuming that all is so simple as just giving them a voter registration card and saying, go vote and stand in the line. When we're not really taking the time to understand everything this person has to deal with in this community and their demographics, or everything they might be facing in a certain neighborhood where they're dealing with, a water crisis, or they're dealing with bad air, they're dealing with an area that has food deserts, they're dealing with all these other things. And we're just coming at them talking about, you need to develop these people so they can change your life. And they're looking at, I just need to survive every day. So we have to be better inclined to make sure that the work that we're doing is paying attention to how these different intersections are impacting a person. So when we're getting out there trying to integrate ourselves in their community, we're coming from where they're at and not asking them to come to where we're at.
It reminds me of nothing about us without us, right?
Yes.
We really listen to the communities that we're trying to serve, so that we serve them in a way that is effective and makes the impact that we want. So many people right now are seeking meaningful action steps to take in this moment in reproductive rights and access. If you could share, how can the listeners here today and Zionist activists in general, how can we show up for now, in addition to, amplifying your messaging, reaching out to our elected officials? What can we be doing to support the work of now?
Well, I think, I appreciate that, and we love support. So we thank you. And I think the best thing is helping us make sure we're getting messaging, accurate, truthful messaging out to communities and making sure they truly understand what's at stake, what we're up against right now, what's the abortion bans, the restrictions, the medication abortion, medication cases and rulings that are coming up, especially the Texas ruling with milprofosone. I can never pronounce that word, the medication, right? But you know what I'm talking about. Milprofosone.
Mifepristone, yep.
Yeah, that is so hard to pronounce.
Oh, it's a mouthful. It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. And I need to work on it because I have to say it too many times. But yes, yes, and just what they all are, what we're facing with that ruling is coming out on the 24th, and how that can be a nationwide impact in how many people will have limited or no access. We need to talk about how also these abortion bans are leading to increased mass incarceration for certain groups and communities. We need to talk about how they're increasing, deaths and increasing homelessness and things like that. So I think this goes back to, how do we work together to make sure we are getting out the right information and accurate, truthful, factual information to communities, and telling them what they can do to be a part of it where they're comfortable. Because there's different things you can do. Everyone's not the person that goes to rallies. Some people are comfortable making phone calls. Some people are comfortable just donating money. Some people are comfortable making signs. Some people are comfortable donating water. But everything counts toward the ultimate goal. And so I think that's where we figure out, how do we get everyone involved so they can be involved. And I think so just coming together so we can support, being involved in action alerts. We can send you copies of our action alerts, which help get messaging out, communicating legislators, and just making sure that we're amplifying the messaging and actual information on what is truly at stake, so that we can fight against these state laws. And there's some federal ones that are coming up too that we have to really be concerned with. And of course, you can always join now as well.
Of course, as we all will. Let's dig in a little bit more deeply to what you just talked about, the Texas case. We have a question in our Q&A from Linda. How concerned is now about the court case in Texas challenging the abortion pill? I'll just say personally, I am somebody who used to work for Planned Parenthood. I'm very concerned about it, incredibly. And so I wonder, how are you all thinking about that? What, how concerned are you right now?
Oh, we're extremely concerned. I mean, this could be a devastating outcome, with this Texas case. I mean, I think millions of people will lose access. And we're already dealing with so many states now who have these draconian laws, who have laws that are coming and creating vigilante laws and bounty laws, and and making charges into murder and femicide and personhood laws and things like that are really coming after the livelihood of women, which makes me question, really truthfully, how are you pro-life if you're going after a person's life, right? Which is their messaging. But I think it's really concerning, because what it's risking is that it's risking putting people in desperate situations of crisis to remove access to everything without understanding the importance of people having options. And so to not only take away, the medical procedure of abortion, but then take away the medical procedure of abortion, is really creating a truly just, I don't even know how to word it. It is beyond just disempowering and just beyond devastating if that were to happen. And I'm really concerned. And also the other things this medication can be used for. There are other medications that are being impacted, and pharmacists being impacted by medications for immunocompromising diseases that are being challenged right now too, for things like rheumatoid arthritis and cancer, because they have ability to create miscarriages or things like that. So we really have to be concerned about this Texas case and the impact of how many people are going to lose access, and how that will affect so many people, and how it will trickle into other areas of desperation and despair for people.
I think what's so striking about it too is like, I don't know that we've seen something where this one case in this one state can impact nationwide and
Nationwide.
nationwide, which is when I first read that, I remember being like, what? And I texted my former colleagues and I was like, is this real? Like
Yeah.
I almost couldn't believe that it was real.
Mhm.
And so it's incredibly concerning. And I'll just say too that like something I really remember being really struck by is that all of these obstacles and all of these laws and all of these bans and all these restrictions, when a patient comes in for abortion care at any health center, there's sometimes they bring that stigma with them, and it brings they
Mhm.
feel that shame, and they feel like I must be doing something wrong, because otherwise why is there so much controversy, why is there so much negativity around this medical procedure that I'm trying to get for the betterment of my life. And so part of the work, I think, is also trying to keep chipping away at that stigma
Right.
that comes with it. And so it's like you said, the messaging is really so important as well.
Right. And I think too, the more we can normalize abortion, and people's stories about abortion, and I think it makes it easier. So the more we can make it real and the faces of it diverse and real, I think it normalizes for people, because right now there is so much stigma and shame attached to it. And that's part of, once again, the messaging and the disinformation to make people feel fearful and make people feel shame and put those, perceptual values on people so that they can win with that, their power and control with those things. But we have to normalize it, because it is a very much part of your healthcare. It's a very much part of something that every community experiences, every family experiences, and you have complete control of your personal autonomy. And that is also part of self-determination, right? Is that you determine what is right for you. Nobody else should be governing that. And we have to start normalizing that, and that right for self-determination, that right for you to make those choices for you. And you don't need to discuss it with anybody. You should not feel ashamed for having to feel like you made that choice on your own. And I think the more we normalize it and share, and for people who feel comfortable sharing their stories, people who don't, that's absolutely fine too. But for those who feel comfortable sharing their stories, to normalize it so that we take that stigma away.
I have a wonderful question here for you. Where do you see the role of men and those who are not able to give birth as allies in Now's work, knowing it's, this beacon of feminism? Where do men come in?
Okay. So I will say non-birthing people. So that I'm being appropriate with my gender expansiveness.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm working, because that's something still we're working on now too, because we are a women's organization, but we also say all women are included, whoever identifies as a woman. So I do want to say that, right? But in saying that, I think we also have to realize that some women cannot give birth, right? And so when we say that comment, I also want to be honest, but I think men can be very effective allies in this space. and they can be very effective allies to talk about the importance of personal autonomy, and the right to choose, and the right to standing up for those rights of personal autonomy and reproductive freedom and liberation, and just sharing those stories, I think, is very important, and talking and also guiding conversations about why women and birthing persons have the right to make those decisions for themselves. And the more we hear that, I think it's great, because it should not be a divide. It shouldn't be like women have to do all this work, and birthing persons have to do all this work to say, like, this is us against them. It's not, it's all of us, right? Everyone's affected. So the more we have these conversations where allies are standing up and saying, I also support this self-determination, this personal autonomy for you to choose what is best for you. And we don't have a right to get involved in this. This is not my fight. This is not your fight to choose for this person. The more we hear those messages from our allies, that is very powerful. And the more they stop the bystander part of it, then I think that's very helpful too.
I have a question from April. Are you doing or have you done a campaign to normalize abortion? Have you asked women to have maybe like a day where they post about their abortion on social media? Is there, this I think brings us back to that chipping away of the stigma. Maybe you could talk about some strategies to empower and help chip away at that stigma.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did around the anniversary of Roe. We did it last year. We did this year where we reached out to get stories of people to share. And we also did it through some of our direct mail where we actually shared some stories of people who sent them in of their personal stories. So really kind of to destigmatize them, bring that messaging home. And then we also, anytime people send in stories for us, we'll share them on our social media. So we do try our best to do that. The other thing that we're doing is there is a woman that I know who is writing a book where she's collecting abortion stories. Her name is Stacey Howard. And so we're listing that. So if anybody has a story that they would like to contribute, we are helping, advertise anyone who has an outlet to create this normalization of these stories. So just anything we can do, like whether it's, we've had also IG lives of providers and people to talk about the stories. So we've been doing lots of different things over the last year or so to talk and try to normalize abortion. And we've done it with providers, we've done it with persons who have had abortions, persons who, who've been affected by someone who's had an abortion. And we've done that. And we've done a lot of storytelling because I really believe storytelling can be a very effective drum in activism. And so we've definitely done that, and we'll continue to do that as we go through. And if anybody has a story they would love to share with us, we would love to share it on our social and through our stories and newsletter.
I agree with you. I think storytelling is the most powerful tool we have for all of the movements that we're trying to push forward. April also did share menforchoice.org. Men4choice.org is a serious male allyship organization in case anybody wants to check them out.
Yeah, that's great.
I'll wrap us with one more question for you. I think everyone who comes to the feminist movement, everyone who comes to the reproductive rights movement sort of has their own story for what brought them to this movement, what kind of opened up their eyes, and they had their awakening in that way. Maybe you could share a few thoughts about your personal journey.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a huge journey besides that I've just always been a person about self-determination. And that's just kind of my belief, right? That we need to make decisions for ourselves and choose what's best for us in our lives, right? And that's just what I've always believed. and so part of my work has been a social worker, my work as a community organizer, my work as a women's rights and child's rights activist, an advocate and therapist has always been, really making sure that self-determination is embedded in the value system that I have. And so it just automatically aligns with reproductive rights and liberation, because this is something that is so crucial, to that as well. I'm a mother, but I waited till I was 41 and I went through like this whole, like, I'm going to have a baby, I'm not going to have a baby, I'm going to have a baby now, I'm going to have a baby, I'm not going to have a baby, but it was all my self-determination. And I remember at different times people were like, are you going to do it? I was, listen, don't question me about my choices. This is my body. You're going to have to carry it. And so it was my own determination when I was ready to do that. And it was powerful for me. And I believe that for everyone. And I believe that regarding it's an abortion or it's a decision to family plan and have a child, or to not to do surrogacy, to do IVF, to do anything, to take birth control, whatever it is, to choose to not have children, whatever it is your right to make that choice. And it's not up for discussion or debate for anybody. So my journey has just always been, truthfully, it is your choice. It is your right to determine what is best for you to live the best life that you can live. And that's just kind of my journey on it.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. We have come to the end of our event today. I just want to thank you, Christian, once more for your time with us. I can speak for all of us at Zioness when I say we're just really inspired by the innovative approach you take to now's urgent priorities and now's mission. I invite everyone here to stay connected to Zioness in whatever ways feel meaningful to you. And I ask that you don't hesitate to reach out to us. Stay tuned for more opportunities to learn and grow together in community with us. Anything you want to share before we close out?
No, just really thank you so much for just creating this space to have this conversation, and also just help me learn more, right, about Zionist movement as well. In any way that we now can be a better partner to you all, please let us know. And we are also open to anything that we can be of support. So thank you for the space and this opportunity to have this conversation. Repro Shabbat.
We feel the same. We are so looking forward to partnering with you all in the future and working together to advance the causes that we all care so much about. I'm so glad to have had this conversation in honor of Repro Shabbat. I couldn't have been a more fitting discussion to have as we head into Shabbat. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. Thank you, Christian. And we'll see you all at the next Zioness event. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.